Hello, my name is Patrick Wambold, and I'm a technical account manager here at Epic Games. Today's topic is external control of Unreal Engine for live events. We're going to discuss how to set up some of these protocols, as well as how to set up Editor Utility Widgets to extend the functionality of the Unreal Engine editor. Okay, before we dive into the editor, let's talk a little bit about the different types of external control we might see in a live event and how they interact with each other on an average live show, because live events have a lot of control systems. There's various different departments that all need to work together in order to pull off a large-scale live event. In fact, here's a very simple diagram of how a live event might work for a musical-based show. There will usually be some sort of audio playback position that'll have a music track that is coupled with a timecode track. This timecode track will then be distributed to the various departments so that they can get all of their elements in sync with the music. The way these departments interact with each other from there is really up to their discretion, and there's no set standard way of doing it. Audio may send MIDI or OSC controls to lighting and video. There may be interactions between lighting and video with DMX, automation, pyro, so on and so forth. And all these positions could have multiple locations and also have multiple different protocols just within their own realm. So some of the key concepts we're going to talk about today are how to set up and control using external protocols inside Unreal. Specifically, we're going to talk about MIDI and DMX. I'm also going to talk about how to use Editor Utility Widgets to control various functions inside the editor. And lastly, I'm going to go over a few new options for sequencer playback and how to use timecode input in order to play back sequencer tracks. Now let's take a look at some of the protocols that Unreal Engine supports. This is by no means an exhaustive list, but some of these should look familiar if you're at all used to working in live events. MIDI, OSC, DMX, timecode. These are very, very common protocols that you'll run into on just about every live show. However, using things like web remote, TCP, UDP packets, or even UMG widgets is something you may not be familiar with. We're going to go over a couple of ideas on how some of these could work, but mostly we're going to focus on MIDI, DMX, and timecode today, as we don't have a ton of time, and I'd like to give you some good information on how to work with these inside Unreal Engine. So here we are inside the editor, and I'm going to show you the most basic way I can think of to set up a MIDI input system that will print out some notes for us and we can see what it is that we're doing. Now, there isn't a way to specify which MIDI device you're using without writing some code. So we're going to hop into the level blueprint, and I'm going to show you just how I would set it up to do something really, really simple. So the first thing we want to do is find all our MIDI devices. We'll run this function, and it's going to return an array of these functions. To look at these, we'll use a for each loop, and we'll hook up the array. Now, all I really want to do right now is print out what it is that is inside of the array. So I'm going to break this element here, since inside the MIDI device, there's a lot of information that comes with it. You get the ID, you get the device name, and you get some information about it. But I really just want to get the ID and the name. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to use an append string here. And what this does is allows me to combine some statements together. I'll put a couple spaces in the middle, and I'll use the ID first, and then the name down here. And let's print it for 5 seconds so I can see a little bit what's going on. So if I hop back out and I hit play, you'll see up here I get a printout of what it is that is connected. And you'll see some of these devices show up twice. The reason that is it shows a separate device for input and output at times. This isn't always the case, but I've noticed that it does happen a decent amount, and usually the first one that shows up is the input. So if I look at this, I have device ID 1 and 2. These are the two that I'm using, and so I know that those are the devices that I want to use. So now that we know the device ID, that's really all we need to create the input controller. I'm going to keep this code up here just for the sake of it so we can see it. And then down here below, we'll just create our MIDI input controller. And the device ID I wanted to use was 1, so I'll just type it in here. And I want to make sure I store this so I keep track of the input controller so that we can use it for other things. So if I drag off and promote this to variable, it'll create one as the correct type. I'm just going to rename this quickly to MIDI _input. And then from here, all we really need to do is figure out what we want to do with this thing. Now, MIDI devices have lots of different generic input types, but the easiest one by far to deal with is just notes. So I'm going to bind this so that we can do note on. So if I type note on, we get these options here. So I can assign MIDI note on. And what this will do is it'll actually create the bind event as well as the custom event for it. And the target is just the MIDI input itself. And so now anytime there's a note on event at all on this controller that we're using here, it's going to give me access to this information. So all I'm going to do right now is just print out the notes that are coming in so we can see them on the screen. And we could do velocity too, but let's just do note numbers for right now. And it'll convert our integer into a string here, and we'll just leave it as is. So now when I run this, I'm going to get this printout of the things that I have. And if I punch on my MIDI controller here, you'll see the note numbers coming in. I'm going to kind of swap over here and let's do Unreal on camera. So you can kind of see that, yeah, I'm pressing on this pad here and I have different note numbers assigned to it, and it's creating the list of them up on the top. Now I have these bound as control changes, and so you can see it's not actually listening to those because we've only set it up for notes right now. And that's really all we need. So from this, knowing what the note number is, we could create all kinds of other logic and just kind of go crazy from here. However, I will say this, if this were actually something I were trying to do, I probably wouldn't do all this inside my level blueprint, and I wouldn't have like an endless statement of switches and branches here either. I would probably want to put a little more forethought into what I was doing, but I really just wanted to give you a quick example of just the minimum amount of things required to do something like this. And truthfully, if you already know the device numbers and stuff like that, you can skip all this stuff at the top too and just go ahead and do it. But a lot of times it's not necessarily something that you know off the top of your head what device ID you're trying to find. So all that is really great, but as I kind of mentioned before, we don't always work in play mode, and a lot of times in live events we'll be in editor mode or waiting until the very last second until we can actually go and build things out for a performance. So it might be nice to be able to move things around in the editor using MIDI or other various protocols. So I'm going to kind of go through an example of that, and what I'm going to use is an Editor Utility Widget. These used to be called Bluetilities, but they allow you to run blueprint logic and affect things in the editor without having to be in play mode. So if you wanted to create one of these, you can go to Editor Utilities, Editor Utility Widget, and you just name it Widget 1 or whatever it is, and you would kind of go from there. So I've created one that I'm going to go through just to give you an idea of some things that you could do. So what I'm going to set up is a MIDI selection system so that I could select one controller or the other. I have a little pad, like drum pad type machine. On the right, I have a sequencer. So I'm going to be able to select between the two of these and do different things depending on what I'm doing. So the way you'd set this up is just like a UMG widget. So you use a series of buttons and boxes. And so I've got a button just to reset my selection. And then I've got a combo box that I can use to get it will create a drop down that has a list of the MIDI devices. All that's inside a panel and a scale box. So if you need some more information on UMG, definitely check out the docs, but I'm going to go ahead and move on. So inside the graph, we're basically doing the same thing that we were doing inside the level blueprint that I created. We're going to get the devices. We're going to go through each one in a loop and get a list of the ID and the name and use that to create our combo box. So now when I change the combo box selection, I'm going to create the input controller based on that selection. Store that as a variable, print it out just so I can see that it did something, and then bind it. So when I bind here, I'm binding again to note on. I'm using the switch on int based on the note number to decide what we're going to do. And if I do note 1, we're going to do some awesome stuff here. Note 2 is nothing. 3, we're going to move. 3 and 4 are both going to be moved. So we're going to move on the X by 100 or negative 100. So I'm calling the same function and just using a separate variable. And then if we use note 36, we're going to do this other function here. So here's the logic for the reset button. I'm unbinding the note on, clearing all the options, getting the devices again, and then creating the options so that I can select a different MIDI device to do the rest of what I'm working on. So this move X function, all I'm doing is I'm getting all the actors with a certain tag. I'm using this tag note 1. I'm going through, I'm getting their location, breaking that out. I'm going to move it by that amount. So here I have 100 or negative 100, depending on what the note is. I'm going to move it by that amount and then set that current location so I could keep doing this. For my event kick, I'm just going to print some stuff to the screen. And this is the basic idea. So I'm going to go back out and I'll run this. So let me just save everything. And I'll run the Editor Utility Widget. And so I'm going to get this box over here. So I know I have my options in here. So first I'm going to grab the drum pad and I'll just kind of swap to the camera again. So now, depending on what notes I'm pressing on the pad, I'm just going to print them to the screen if it's not the notes I'm looking for. But if I go to note 1, it's going to print the doing amazing, awesome stuff here. And 2 doesn't do anything. And 3, as I said, is going to move it on the X, and 4 is going to move it the opposite direction. Now, this is all working off tags, as I said, so there's no reason I couldn't make this box move too. If I select it, and usually you got to scroll down here to actor, it may be not exposed at first. You just twirl this down, and then I can add a tag to it here. So if I type in note 1, now it has the same tag as the other ones do. So again, if I do 3, now they all move together. If I do 4, they all move the other direction. And I could apply this to any object in the scene if I wanted to. And I could also set up different rules for different tags and all kinds of things. Again, I probably would not recommend a giant switch on end with like hundreds of switch statements for different cases. But I just wanted to kind of show an example of one way that this could work. Now, if I swap back over to, if I reset my selection here and I grab the sequencer playback here as well. So if I start this and just play it back, you'll see every time the kick drum hits, I'm getting a printed message for the kick, and I'm getting the other notes as well. So it wouldn't take a whole lot of imagination to think of something that we could use this for. However, in the interest of time, I'm just going to go ahead and move on and show you a couple other ideas of how you can use these utility widgets to set up some other things. So I'm going to reset the selection and go back to the pad, just because what I'm actually going to do now is these here, I have these set up as, you can kind of see the light going back and forth, but I have them set up as control changes instead of notes. I'm just going to show a different idea. It works in a very similar manner, but it's just another way. I just want to show you one more kind of option on this. So you may have noticed it actually was doing something here in the scene. It's affecting the color of this cube. So let me go back to that camera. So on the first one, I'm affecting the red channel. On the second one, I'm affecting the green channel. And on the third one, I'm affecting the blue channel of these the color that I have on this material on this cube here. So what I've actually done to make this work is I've gone and I've created a material parameter collection. If you don't know what this is, look through the documentation. It's basically a way to specify certain parameters for materials that you want to affect either multiple materials, but it also works in Editor, which is the reason that I'm using it in this instance. So if I go and I open up the actual material, which I have is this basic color, all I'm doing is I'm taking that vector parameter and plugging it directly into the base color. So nothing too fancy, but in order to make that work, I wrote this other statement over here. Now, again, this is not like the cleanest way to do any of this, but it was a good way to show exactly what's happening. So when I do a control change, I'm getting a different type is how they specify it here. So for the switch on int, I'm actually just using which control change number that I would be associated with it. So I have 9 set up as my first wheel here, and I have 10 as my next one, and 11 is my next one. And so that's kind of how I have this broken up in order to control this. So I'd set 3 different variable values. And so if it's 9, I want it to use value 1, which I have going into the red channel. Now, what all this logic is here is the parameters inside this collection are always going to be from 0 to 1. But I know my MIDI values coming in are going to be 0 to 127. So I'm dividing by 127 here, in order to get this to give me the number that I want. So again, I could collapse these down and do, you know, a similar function on all of them, and there's a lot easier ways to do this, but I just wanted to make sure you guys understood that, like, you know, you have to do some conversion here to get these int values to match the float values that would work for this vector parameter. So all that I've done here is this set parameter vector is I'm picking the collection and then I'm picking the name. I only have one in here, but if I had several different ones, I could pick between that. And that's all that's really driving this. So again, if I move up on this one, I'll get red. And if I move up on this one, I'm getting green. And this one I'm getting blue. Now you might be wondering, can I do all three or can I do different ones at the same time? Of course, yeah. There's no real reason that you can't, as long as you have enough MIDI channels and bandwidth to support everything. There's no reason that you can't do that as well and hook up as many of these as you would like. So hopefully that gives you a decent idea of some of the things that are possible working with the MIDI input. I'm going to give a couple of other ideas on how this could work with DMX, and also just some other ideas for editor utility widgets. So now on to some options about DMX. I'm not going to go over too much in detail on how DMX works or how to work with it in the engine. My buddies Dennis and Chris are going to be doing a nice talk on that, but I wanted to talk about just some specific things that maybe you could do with it in Editor, and just some common like pain points that maybe you can make your life easier by using editor utility widgets. So I've set up a library here called DMX Library 1, and inside of it I have my Beamy Light, and I have 10 of these Beamy Lights patched. Now, if I go into my scene and I have 10 of these Beamy Lights, which our internal artist here did a fantastic job kind of making these work, and there's definitely going to be some awesome updates to this coming forward. But if I wanted to address all of these, right now the process is I click on one, I go over here, I go to my DMX component, I pick the library, and I pick the patch. And just to kind of show, how this could actually, be done. Normally, I might only have one of these in the scene, and then, I'm going to duplicate it, and then duplicate it, and then duplicate it, and then duplicate it, and kind of keep going like this, and then maybe I duplicate these 5, and so on and so forth, so I can create these big arrays of these things. However, all these now are patched to the same address, and if I have to go through them one by one and pick them, it's kind of going to be a bit of a slow process. So I wanted to kind of give you another idea of how you can use these editor utility widgets to make this go faster. So I made this one I call my DMX setter. And if I open this up, you can see the same idea as before. I have 2 combo boxes and a big button that says address fixtures. So if I go to my graph, this might look intimidating, but a lot of it is the same logic that we've done in other things. But I just want to kind of show you a little bit of an idea of what we're doing and how this could work. So all I'm doing is, in this case, I'm getting the DMX libraries that are available to me. I have 2 of them in here. I'm going to create my combo box based on those libraries. And then I'm also going to get the fixtures that are inside the library that I select. Now, the way it's set up, I have it set so there's just at least something in there as a default option, but this would work best if you set your library first and then pick your fixture. Doing it the other way around could cause you some problems. Then as soon as I click on the address button, what it's going to do is check to see if the amount of lights I have selected matches the amount of lights that I'm trying to patch. And really, I've just done this because I don't want to run into a situation where I'm double patching or I don't know what's going on. So if for some reason there's a mismatch, it's just going to give me a message that says, hey, you have a different number of lights than you're trying to patch. You can make this logic as nice as you wanted to and make it so that it would, maybe start over or, do some other things. But in this case, all I'm going to do is tell myself, hey, you got a mismatch somewhere, and I'll fix it. So what I'm going to do now is I'll run this utility widget as well. I get the same thing where I'm going to go and I'm going to dock it down here. And so now when I go to the first drop-down box, I'm going to pick DMX Library 1. Then I can pick which light I want to start with. So I'm going to say Beam Light 1. And it's going to be based on how many I select. So if I select 5 of them and I hit address fixtures, it's going to address those 5. So now when I go through and I look at my component, I should have 2, should have 3, 4, you know, and so on. So if I wanted to do all 10, it's not really an issue either, as long as I have, you know, the first one selected and there are 10 lights. If I hit address, it's going to do those 10. I go down and same thing, 10. And there's no reason I couldn't keep going. So if I say did this, and then I duplicated that like a few more times, you notice eventually I go over the universe step, so I'd actually have to readdress these. So I'm just going to delete them now just for simplicity's sake. But now I have 30 of these lights. So if I were to grab these 10 and then same process, I'm literally just going to alt drag them in the viewport and create 30 total. If I grab all of these and start on 1, hit address fixtures, it's telling me I have a count mismatch. And the reason that is because I didn't bother to refresh this. So when I added new things to the patch, since it's got new information, I may need to rerun this utility widget. So if I close it out, run it again, now if I populate the library, and now I have my full list here, I set 1, and I hit address fixtures, and it's going to address all of them. All right, so if you do a patch change, you may have to do this because it may not be updating properly, but this will still be much, much faster than having to go through and do these individually. And again, the logic in here, it may look like there's a lot of nodes, but it's not super complex. It's basically working off the number of selected level actors I have. I'm doing a comparison to see, are there enough lights in the patch that match like the index number that I'm on? And then I'm literally just setting based on the fixture array, like the index numbers. It's nothing too complicated, and you could definitely make it work even better if you wanted to. So with that, I'm going to go ahead and maybe show one last idea about how you can use DMX inside Unreal. So the last thought on DMX here is, what if I wanted to control, say, like a scene light that was the overall directional light for this scene? Well, there's a couple of things I might want to control: intensity, light color, stuff like that. So let me just show you one way that you could maybe do it. I've created a blueprint here, and if I open it up, you can see that inside the viewport there's nothing here except this directional light. Which is the same thing as if you were to add one to the scene, but I've just created it with a blueprint. And I've added this DMX component onto it. And this just gives me access to some parts of the patch that I want to use. So if I actually go into my event graph here, what I'm doing now is on tick, which, you know, I probably would not do it this way. I would use like on event received or something like that. But just as an example, I'm going to get the DMX library. I'm going to get the patch that I'm using, and now I'm breaking out the function of that patch that I want. So I'm going to, in this case, I want color add R, G, and B out of this. I'm going to use that, and again, I'm doing a conversion here so I can get it into float numbers. So DMX is again 255. I want to convert to float numbers, and then I'm going to get the component of this actor by its class. So I'm going to use Directional Light class, and then I'm going to feed that in to the light color. Now, what this would allow me to do then is use my DMX input, and I can use 3 channels, and then that would directly affect this light color that we have here. And then I can use this to affect the light color inside the world of just like the overall directional light with a DMX fixture on a lighting console. So just one way that you can kind of set this stuff up. There's no reason that you couldn't use color collection parameters. Like, you know, here I had red, green, and blue, and I had these set up as scalars. You could do it this way as well. There's lots of different options, but just wanted to show you that the way to kind of set this up so it would work inside of you know, Editor, or you can even do this as an Editor Utility Widget. So if you did this on Construct, you could have there's no reason you couldn't access the library and then bind to on DMX received or on, and so from there you could basically control anything inside the engine using DMX as well as inside the editor. So really, really powerful stuff there if you're used to working with a lighting console and you want to set up some kind of external queuing system that you could use to control internal objects inside the editor. So the last part of this is the idea of controlling a sequencer track with timecode. If you're working with linear timecode, one of the best ways to get it in right now is to use either an Aja or Blackmagic capture card, and depending on which one you're using, you can either use the reference pin or have it embedded in the video stream. So to do this, I'm just going to use Aja as an example here, but it would work similarly with Blackmagic. I'm going to add a blueprint class, and then I'm just going to search for Aja, and I get these two options, but I'm going to use this timecode provider, and I'm just going to name it Aja 1. And if I open this up and I go over here on the right hand side, you'll see I have these different options. So if I'm working with the Kona 5, I could use a reference pin and pick it. If I'm not, I would have to pick a configuration here and pick which input I'm going to use. Now I don't have a Kona card in this computer, which is why I'm not getting any options. But then from there, I would be able to set which input I'm listening to for my timecode input. Now, the part in the sequencer track that's kind of new, that's just been added, that makes this possible, is there's now an option. If you go into this drop down here for your clock source, you can either pick timecode or relative timecode. In past versions, the only option really was timecode, but it actually worked like relative timecode, meaning that like when you would play on this timeline, whatever was coming in, it would play frame locked, but it wouldn't necessarily jump to the frame in which you were actually on. It was more just a matter of trying to keep it in line with it. So, but now if you're using this and you go clock source timecode, and if I'm actually in play mode, whenever my timecode signal comes in, it's actually going to jump to that position and chase it exactly where it was. And this is the way that most live events work when they're working with linear timecode. So I definitely encourage you to look into this. In future releases, we're definitely planning on supporting other methods of doing this. However, right now, this is the best and most efficient way to deal with it. That's fully supported on all of for 425 and up. So to recap, today we went over a few examples of how to work with different control protocols inside the engine. I showed you a simple example of how to get your MIDI devices and bind them to note on or control change events. I went over Editor Utility Widgets and showed you how you can use them in order to extend the functionality of the editor and run blueprints inside of Editor without being in play mode. And lastly, I showed you an example of how you would set up to chase timecode from an external source using an Aja or Blackmagic capture card. And with that, I'd like to say thank you very much. I hope you enjoyed the presentation. If you have any additional questions, definitely head over to the documentation. There's lots more information about all the topics discussed today. And with that, thank you. We hope to see you again soon.